to the World Humanitarian Forum audience, and welcome to everyone joining us from all around the world. My name is Simon Rodgers, and I have the pleasure of chairing this panel, in which we'll discuss the topic of redefining equality. And by way of introduction to myself, I'm the People Director for One Young World, which is the preeminent forum for young leaders. I'm also a specialist in diversity and inclusion and consult for a range of corporates, NGOs, charities and tech startups to really help them evolve their thinking on equality, diversity and inclusion issues, supporting their employees, their communities and the people they serve. Now, I'm joined by the most incredible panel today, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome them to the World Humanitarian Forum stage. Welcome Mrs. Tawakkol, Karman, Her Highness Sheikha Intisar AlSabah, Dr. Salma Nims and Lord Simon Woolley. Welcome and thank you all for joining us today. And I'd just like to invite you all to briefly introduce yourselves and perhaps share with us where you're joining us from in the world today. I'm going to work across the screen. So Mrs. Tawakkol, Karman, welcome.
Thank you so much, Simon, and I'm so happy to be with you all in this very important conference. We are one world. This essential sentence is closely related to what we are meeting for, related to a long series of fundamental issues associated with humanity and human rights. In a world that suffers from threats to human dignity and right to life, equality also arising as a result of violation and oppression practiced by tyrannical regimes or as a result of poverty and lacking of very basic necessity of life due to tyranny and social inequality. Talking about equality, the aid system and negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, making me, remember, as I always, remember, and as always talking about it's, my country. So let's talk about my country, Yemen, as an example of all these aspects. If you would like to start this, talk, Simon. So do you want me to start, or you want the other people to?
I'm going to go across the panel, and then I'll come back to you. So thank you very much, and welcome, and thank you for joining us from Yemen. I'll move over to the next person on my screen, Your Highness Sheikha Intisar AlSabah. If you could introduce yourself and tell us where you are in the world today.
So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am speaking from Kuwait. I'm actually in my office. That is lacking in a bit of AC. It's very warm outside. So if I start shining, that's because it's quite warm. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like to start by just saying a few things about me, introducing myself to whoever is watching and listening. Well, I went through an abusive marriage, and then I became, within a year, I became a refugee. So leaving an abusive marriage and suddenly becoming a refugee because of the Iraqi invasion on Kuwait was a little bit too much for my I think I was 24, 25 at the time. That was, I think, a little bit too much with two little girls. So that was quite a shock to my system. And it took me many, many years and many therapies to get out of it. And this is what catapulted me into working using different methodologies of psychological intervention to have changes in our community, but also in the Arab world. So I started with I had a very crazy idea about 8-9 years ago to use positive psychology it was very crazy. Everyone thought it was bonkers. I loved it. I continued, and it became very successful. So we used positive psychology in Kuwait. We started in the beginning using it all over, in masses, in malls, and telling people about positive psychology and the effect of looking at life in a different manner and how it can change one's life, but it also can change one's hope factor. Let's call it the hope factor. And from that, we went into schools, and just before the lockdown with COVID, we were in 47 schools, training about 500 teachers to implement a positive psychology curriculum that we have come up with professionals in positive psychology, and they were training 11,000, close to 12,000 students. Now, the changes that we saw in the students is what encouraged me later on to start Intisar Foundation, which I'm going to be speaking about in 1 second. So the students went, well, a lot of students started being more kind to other students, the aggressiveness stopped, they started liking their school more, they started liking the teacher more, they started having better grades, bullying went down, smoking went down. So there's a lot of crazy things happened when people started seeing the world from a better lens or a better perspective, and that always, you know, and then we started another initiative where we used applied theater to combat bullying in middle school children. And even with that, once they connected with their emotions, once they were allowed to role play, we saw the decline in bullying and rise in kindness. And that, then I started my third initiative, which is supporting the self-empowerment of Arab women affected by wars and conflict and crisis to become peace builders in the Arab world. Another crazy idea when we started with, because we use drama therapy, it's a different form, but a very credible form of therapy, again, allowing the women to use their voices, allowing the women to engage with their emotions. So I'll end it up with one thing. We've worked with 10-year-olds, we've worked with 10-year-old boys or girls in school, and we've worked with 80-year-old women in camps. All of them benefited from any kind of psychological intervention. The women in the camps, the women were working with small and medium enterprise, let's say, women affected by the Beirut port blast. And even with them, they have the means, they have the money, they have everything, but their mind is not with it. Their mind, you know, it's like a TV screen that is just turning from one thing to the other. They're confused. Once we started supporting them, now they're more focused. They know what they want to do. So I'll start this, which is what I'll end it with in the last 3 minutes. We need to work with people on a psychological level. Giving them money is not enough. Telling them they're strong is never enough, because I'm looking at me, I have the money, I have the name, I have everything, yet I allowed myself to be abused. That's because I didn't have the inner capacity to stop it. And we've seen with our women, once they have the inner capacity to stop things, their life changes. To stop the thoughts in their heads, to stop their self-abuse. Therefore, what's reflected is the outside abuse. And I'll end it there, and I'll leave it to Dr. Nims. And thank you so much, Dr. Salma, for wearing what you're wearing. Kudos. Peace.
Thank you very much, Your Highness. And I'm going to move around my screen as well, and go next to Dr. Salma Nims. If you could introduce yourself, and again, tell us where you're joining us from today.
Good morning, Simon, and I am really honored to be speaking among such prestigious and people who have had and still having impact all over the world on issues that are relating to issues related to inequality. And I would like to thank the World Humanitarian Forum for giving me this opportunity to speak. I am currently the Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women. I am a Jordanian who's a daughter of a Palestinian refugee from Jaffa who was expelled from his home in 1948. So I grew up in a home where issues related to injustice was always there. Being just a Jordanian exposed to the news all over the 50 years of my life, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, seeing what's happening to all over the Arab nation, and specifically in Palestine and Lebanon at the time. I grew up and I started studying I was an architect, but I had a very strong sense of commitment to issues related to justice. Not only this concept of justice, maybe it started by the fact of being a daughter of a refugee, but it was about justice for everyone. I was always moved, angered by any form of injustice, whether it's related to poverty, racism, gender discrimination. It always angered me. And that's maybe why I left architecture and I went on to study sustainable development, and which became later on my career, and again shifted back again into gender issues when Her Royal Highness Princess Basma bin Talal appointed me in this position. My work has always, I could never, like my work, although our work is on women issues, but we would never remove these issues, women issues, from their intersectionalities, because we knew that inequality gets exacerbated the more you have different aspects that relate to your vulnerability. Her Royal Highness talked about the issues related to abuse, and we know, yes, you don't. It's not only about poverty. Also, rich women could be abused. So it's not that. It's very complicated. So my work has always been through that. In the recent years, something very important we took over in our work, which is working on women, peace, and security, and the implementation of the UN Security Council 1325. And we have been always talking that it is not only about looking at women as victims, which is also important, but also the role of women and the agency of women to define the dialogue, to define the narrative, to become agents of change, and to talk about issues, how they can change the politics that are contributing to inequalities and to abuse, and so of course women in conflict, women under occupation, women in wars are going to be subjected to even more inequalities that we need to work on. And we have been talking to the global community, to the international community, that do not just make it humanitarian. Don't make it only about aid. Make it about agency, the choice to resist, the choice to have a voice on how you want peace in your own country and for your own nations. So this is where I come from, and I look forward to discussing more about inequalities, because I just have to remind the world that this started in 1946 after the Second World War II, when the Human Rights Declaration was adopted, because we wanted a new world. And look at us now. More inequality, more poverty, more oppression, more racism. What happened to us? Have we gone off track? Maybe it's not about a definition. It's about our values as humans. Did we really adopt, internalize these concepts and became strong, and so we're standing by them? I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and welcome. Next, I'll go across to welcome Lord Simon Woolley, if you'd like to introduce yourself. And I believe you said before that you're joining us from London also.
I am, and it is a good day to you all. Thank you, Simon. First of all, can I say what a great honor it is for me? I see myself as a disciple of Dr. Martin Luther King, and many of you know that Dr. King had more than a dream. He had a plan. And step one of that plan was not to ask for justice and equality, but to demand it. The second point I want to make, Simon, is that as an activist, I am truly honored and empowered to be with my three sisters on this panel. I think for so long, the world order has put men at the center stage. Now, I don't know whether you did this on purpose. There was a higher power moving you, but to put three powerful women on a panel to demand that we confront not just equality, but equity and dignity, that I feel proud to be shoulder to shoulder with our sisters. I run an organization here in the UK called Operation Black Vote. And we've been fighting for the last 25 years. I had no grey hair then, Your Royal Highness. It was as dark as yours, as beautiful as yours, but now it's grey. But I'm fine with that. But we have fought for the right to be respected, to have seats around the decision-making table, to plan a future that not only benefits us, but benefits everyone. It's not a zero-sum game. Because we win, you don't lose. When we win, we all win. And I think that what this conversation is today, particularly around the awful year we've had with COVID-19 and the wars that are still enraging across the world, it gives us a moment to zoom out, to reflect. And you will hear a lot of people talking in the COVID space that we need to build back better. I say they're profoundly wrong, because going back was not good. Going back was steeped in inequality and oppression. In this moment of reflection, as has already been said, when you go back from a world war, you don't build back better, you build new better. And if we don't seize this moment, if we're not bold enough, brave enough to build new better, then we may as well go home. I hope in the next 20, 30 minutes or so that we will outline what building new better means. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think I reflect on a couple of points there. I think that your point around Dr. Luther King having a plan and the conversation that we're having today seeks for us all to think about what that plan is, and for the audience we have joining us today to think about their plan. I think there's a lot of different elements that we can cover in this session to consider what the rebuilding looks like, and to your point again, Lord Woolley, building new better. One of the questions that I had was really thinking about how we look at different elements of equality that perhaps haven't been considered before, or that we perhaps not include in the definition of inequality. And on that, I'm quite interested in digital technology and access to digital technology as well, for people to engage with systems, debate, dialogues. So my question, going back to Mrs. Tawakkol Karman, was, with digital technology becoming more prevalent in our lives and in global politics, but many citizens still not having access to everyday tech that is often deemed necessary. Because of this, does technology access need to be fitted into the new definitions of equality? I'm really interested to take your thoughts on that.
When I talk about equality, and when people like me belong to the area in Arab region, talking about equality, technology is one of the elements that we are looking for. Equality in accessing, to technology. As a people belong to the third world, and we want the access to technology to be really, equal for all people around the world. But we are talking about another dimension, of equality. We are talking about the equality between citizens and their rulers. We belong to Arab Spring countries that suffer and struggle for equality, for freedom, for democracy, for justice, for dignity. People who demonstrate went to the streets peacefully, calling for equality, calling the rulers to give them the chance to access to their rights, to choose their rulers, equality on accountability, equality on accessing to resources, equality on having the simple services in electricity, in health, in education. So we are redefining equality in our region, calling for real access to resources, to real democracy, to the right of life. Now people are dying under the rule of those authoritarian regimes. Now people is dying under the occupation of Israel, for example, or in our country in Yemen under the occupation of Saudi and Emirates and their war in Yemen. Now people are dying when they are calling for real equality, that they are suffering from the coup of Houthi militia that backed from Iran. So we are now, this is the equality that we are suffering and that we are sacrificing and that we are looking for, real equality in our region.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to think about the equality of access to resources, and in terms of building that plan. What are the foundations that we need, and having fair access to technology is a fundamental part of that. But I think I guess to go on from there, on that theme of rebuilding. And to some of the points you made around conflict and war, I'm very interested to hear from Her Highness Sheikha Intisar AlSabah on the theme of rebuilding, how you think the international community can better support survivors of conflict and war to help them integrate back into society and rebuild their own equality.
I'm going to ask a question. Why should the international community support survivors? I mean, is there a reason that the national community would support survivors of war? And why should they or us support their integration into society? Basically, because if we don't, this will continue, this will grow. Inequality, war. To me, they're all different words to the same thing. Wars come from inequality. Inequality creates wars, internal, external, country-wise, inside the person. Why should we support the people to, number one, have more equality, but also to be integrated in society? Because we want a more peaceful world. We want to go on a panel like this and smile and say, oh my God, we did well. We were able to close this, get down this fire, this war, this inequality, this abuse, whatever one wants to call it. So why should we support, and how we should support is, I mean, there's lots of ways, but again, going back to, the why is because we want to smile and think we're better human beings. Basically, that's why. We want to think that we have done something good in this world. And I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about countries. And countries are doing it, countries are actually run by people. Now, there's many different ways, but again, going back to my experience, and I'll talk about my experience, using different forms of creative therapies has a much bigger effect on the people, on the recipients, than normal, or let's say serious, and I'll call them serious, psychological interventions. When we started looking at how to support Arab women affected by war, we looked at different, very, very credible, but different kinds of psychological interventions. But the taboo, the stigma, the backing away from all these interventions for many reasons is what stopped us from going down that same route. And so we went into drama therapy, or in schools we went to positive psychology, because they're creative. There is an aspect of adventure. They don't create any stigma, taboo to the people using them. And they have huge, great results when used. See, I'm asked all the time, what is the best way to support, if not women, let's say people who are in an internal turmoil caused by an external factor? And I love quantum physics. I love looking at frequencies of the brain, and I did a lot of biofeedback. And from that, I've learned that when we are serious, when we are serious in our pain, when we can't see hope, we cannot change. Positive psychology always says the more people look at things from a more positive perspective, the more avenues they have to better their life. Quantum physics has proved that the spectator influences the atom's trajectory. Isn't it by time we started supporting people to look at themselves, to look at their lives, to look at the world in a better way? Yes, sometimes life is difficult, but imagine if we could support everyone and inform them and let them know that if they just change the way they're looking at things, the things might change. And I'll talk about myself again. When I was a refugee, yes, I went through days where I felt really sorry for myself, really sorry. And I had 2 little girls and I didn't know what to do. I had no money. Yes, I had no money. It doesn't matter what I am now, but during that very short period between leaving Kuwait, which was about 2 weeks because we were hunted down by the Iraqis at the time, and getting enough money, I didn't have a lot of money. It was a short period, it was about a month or so, but that was enough for me because I've always had money. So what helped me was to have hope that my country would be back, that my daughters will grow, whatever hope it is. Some people can have more hope than others, but everyone needs hope. Everyone needs to have their mind clear enough to make sound decisions. Because if we don't do sound decisions, we make reactive decisions. When I'm angry, 100%, that's going to reflect on my daughters. I'm going to put all my wrath on them because I feel so angry. And the same with every person who feels victimized in this world. Refugees, people who are in a crisis, COVID survivors, people who are going through COVID and are unemployed now and they need to make ends meet. When we don't support them psychologically, mentally, emotionally, not only will they not be able to get out of it, but what's worse is they will pull everyone down with their anger. Hurt people hurt. Victims are the most vicious of people. Let's work on getting everyone out of the victim mentality and then let them be creators of their own life. No matter how small that creation is, it's better than allowing them to live forever feeling sorry for themselves and hurting everyone who doesn't see it.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And yeah, I really appreciate the creativity that you mentioned there. I think that's really, really important. I think we've all had to become more creative in the things that we do during COVID. So now's the perfect time to really build on that creativity and to be more creative, to be bolder, and to continue that journey. One of the things I'm also interested in, and Lord Woolley, I'm going to come to you with this. We've talked around accessibility resources. We've talked about being more creative in how we rebuild. One of the points that was mentioned before by Dr. Salma Nims in the introduction was around the Human Rights Declaration, and I'm interested in your interpretation of, I guess, coming down to law and sitting in the House of Lords and the things that you've encouraged people to do and to be involved in politics. I'm interested to hear from you why equality by law is often not enough to guarantee equality, and how do we overcome those societal barriers as well?
Well, there's a lot to unpick there, but I think we're essentially looking at power and those who are powerless. And if you begin to understand where power lies, how it works, how you might democratically take it, then you begin to rebalance the inequity. And I think what COVID-19 did in many countries, particularly in some of the so-called modern countries, was that it exposed the deep structural inequalities. The inequalities were already there in gender, in race, in disability. And what COVID-19 did, it shone a spotlight on these systemic inequalities. For example, here in the UK, that it was astonishing that in those first few months of COVID and people dying, 97 of the 100 doctors that died were of color, African or Asian. That if you were black, you were 4 times more likely to die by COVID. 3 times more likely if you were Pakistani or Bangladeshi. So what was it? Was it we were somehow genetically inferior to this deadly disease? Well, of course we were not. The reason why we were dying in disproportionate numbers was because we were overly exposed to the deadly disease because of societal determinants, such as low pay. If you don't work, you don't get paid. And if you want to care for your family, you go to work in those danger zones. And so what this disease said, well, look, if you open up your eyes, you will see structurally where things are going wrong. But of course, once you know, then you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? And I'm afraid to say that in these deep-seated conversations where you look at structural inequality, that it depends upon those in power on how they view this historic moment. We had in the UK and across the world a double pandemic. First COVID-19, then the death of George Floyd, when millions of people took to the streets. And in this traumatized societies that we were, you had to ask yourself but one question. When you see these structural inequalities, what will you do? The answer was normally threefold. Do nothing, do a little or something, or do something dramatic. And in doing something dramatic, the starting point would have to be, and many of those young people from the Black Lives Matter global protest said, look, the first and bravest step in world history that we must take is this. We have to look at the institutions that happened from 500 years ago, the enslavement of Africans, the colonization of half the world by the Western countries, and have a look at how the past still influences the present. And when you are big enough and bold enough to look at that, then you have the most unique opportunity in our lifetime to build new better. Now, I'll just finish on this because this is really important. When you see the duplicity of people saying, we're in this together, let's all fight, we're not. And I'll give you the most shocking example. Yes, we've seen that example in the Israel and Palestinian situation about the inequity of power. But let me give you another example. The World Health Organization said a few months ago that the world had delivered about 80 million vaccinations for COVID-19, about 80 million. And then the head said this, which I thought was heartbreaking. In the poorest countries in the world, they had delivered 25 vaccinations. What does that say about equity? What does that say about we're all in this together? This is our time. I told you I'm a disciple of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King said over 50 years, the biggest problem for African Americans is not the Ku Klux Klan. It's not the white supremacists. It's the liberal moderates. Because they hold the power. And if they keep by default locking our countries out, locking our communities out, locking themselves in, then how can we have a decent society? I can't see your audience today. I like to look at them in the eyes. I want to see them smile or grimace, but respond. I can't do that. I'm hoping that they can hear me and hear my sisters and hear our plea today in this humanitarian space, that if it's to be meaningful, if we are to walk away with something special, then we need to look in the mirror. We need to look in the mirror and we need to say, what's my role? What's our role? Because those with least amount of power that are still being told that we can do things for you. No, we can do things for ourselves. Thank you, but just allow us to do it.
Thank you, Lord Woolley, and yeah, throughout that, I felt myself smile and grimace probably in equal measure as I respond to that and reflect on the journey that we've been on through the pandemic, but also the inequalities that have been highlighted through that. I take also your point on the inequality between countries and back to the subject of redefining inequality. I'm going to ask Dr. Salma Nims to join the conversation and as I ask the question, does the inequality that exists within developed countries have an impact on our thinking about redefining inequality?
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, I mean, many of the, a lot of my question maybe was pointed out on issues by His Excellency Lord Simon on this issue. I remember at the beginning of the lockdown for the entire world last March, that I read a quote that really touched me, which said something around, we are all in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. And this is the reality for nations and for communities within nations. And as Lord Simon has said, look how much inequality is there in the developed nations that are actually the results of the historic colonization, and see how it is reflecting. I mean, if this is happening within those nations, how do you see that those nations would be, and their role as the powers, they are still the powers of the world, and how they look at the rest of the world and how much they contribute to change and in their policies. We see funding going to human rights, freedom, democracy, liberation of the nations that we choose to liberate, but not all the nations that we need to liberate. And why? Because it's about interest. It's about money. And it was mentioned by someone in the opening session in setting the scene, that we're seeing more and more concentration of money and power into a small number of nations that are controlling the world, and into the riches of the rich hands within those nations that are affecting the policies of their nations. Because who is lobbying for policies? Who is impacting the parliament and the Congress? And it's not the poor, they are unable to shift votes. If they are able, if the poor were able to shift votes, we would have seen Sanders long time ago in the, a president of the United States. And the same we see happening in the UK, in the elections in the UK, over and over again, which means that there is not, the fact that there is not even true commitment to equality within these developed nations, it's a reflection of a mentality, of the lack of internalization of this responsibility towards humanity. As Lord Simon has said, a recent report for UN Women report, I just want to quote the numbers, said that the global economy was expected to shrink by 5% in 2022, and around 435 million women and girls will be living on less than $1.9 a day, including 47 million pushed into poverty as a result of COVID. But what's more important, the report noted that poverty, race, and ethnicity exacerbated the risk of women contracting and dying of COVID-19 in the US and the UK, as pre-pandemic economic and social inequalities in living and work conditions, lack the access to social and health services, increased the disadvantage of Blacks, Asians, and Latin Americans. That's in the developed countries. So how much are these policies and foreign policies in our nations? See what's happening, has been happening to India. Now, the West, who has vaccinated almost 50 to 60% of its people, is moving on to start for economic boom, while we're seeing still people dying, and we're seeing infrastructure by arms sold by the same nations that are funding our programs on human rights, funding selling of arms that are destroying infrastructure of countries like Yemen, nations, people under occupation, the Palestinians. So really, I think if they have responsibility to their people first, then their people voices will be heard, then foreign policy would be changed, and then we will see everything changing all over the world. This is what I believe would happen, and I think, again, it's all a cycle. It's all a cycle. The fact that it's not happening in the developed world says a lot about their policy, how people are reaching decision-making, how these policies are designed, who's leading the design of these policies. So consequently, we see lip service and a little bit funding going towards peace and prosperity, while the funding going for wars is higher, because that's make rich people richer. That's the reality. Do you know how many countries sell arms to Israel? More than 10 countries in the world. And we are having proxy wars for these powerful nations on the land of people who are poor and becoming poorer, like in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Libya. I mean, these things happening. And Your Excellency, Your Royal Highness, I'm sure, and I just want to make this out to say it now, I would like to thank the Kuwaiti people for their position with the Palestinian people. It was even before. You've always stood by the Palestinians, and having gone through a short occupation, you understand probably and more and for Your Excellency Tawakkol, you've been through this, your nation, your people are suffering. So it's coming from your sense, what you've been through, but also I'm sure because you have human rights values instilled with you, and Lord Simon, because you know that this is not only about race, all forms of intersectionality are contributing to inequality in our world.
Thank you, Dr. Salma, and thank you for echoing all the important points that have been raised in the panel as well. I'm very conscious of time with 10 minutes left, but I'd like to just circle back around the panel again and just take, having heard from each other, just to think of or just to vocalize your thoughts back on the topic of the redefinition of equalities, the structures, the infrastructures and the pillars, and the activism, the creativity that's required to rebuild and to build new, better. So I'm going to go back around the panel again and just take your further thoughts as we head towards the end of the session. So Mrs. Tawakkol, Karman, back to you for your thoughts.
Look, again, we are looking for equal citizenship inside our countries and outside our countries. The world is suffering from lack of equal citizenships between countries and between nations. Now, people, and let us talk about women in front of these people. They are looking for real equality, for redefining the equality. It is not just equality between women and men, which is a very important step. And this is a very important struggle that we are struggling for as a women in these countries that suffer from inequality and suffer from lack of democracy and suffer from bad traditions and customs. But also we are looking for real equal citizenship that lead to fighting corruption, that lead to fighting injustice, that lead to fighting tyrannies. The problem now with the developed countries, especially with the Western countries, that they are claiming that they are supporting the democracy and they support equality and they support women, that they define equality and democracy just as equality and democracy in their nations, in their countries. Not they see to the Arab people, they see to the people in Latin America, in Africa, that they don't deserve equality and they don't deserve democracy. They are just looking for their benefits. They are just looking for their interests. And also, always, unfortunately, they didn't see to the long-term interests, which is making a real ally, a real effort to support people for their equality and for their democracy. Looking now with the women who called for equality in a country like Saudi Arabia. Most of them, they are in the prison, and there is no real effort to push Mohammed bin Salman and his regime to free those women. They just talk about democracy and equality in something fragile. They don't go to the deepness. The same thing in Yemen. They support Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, the crown prince of Emirates, in their war in Yemen, while we are calling for equality, which is the values of this innocent Western countries. So they are also now, they are doing a great work, with making agreement with Iran regarding the nuclear agreement. That is very important effort to push Iran to peace and to push Iran to stop their work on creating nuclear. But at the same time, the price will be, well, with the dreams of people of equality, the dreams of people in Yemen, while they ignore the Iran support to the militia of al-Houthi in Yemen in their troubling my country. Forgive me when I just focusing on this on these items, because we are struggling, we are sacrificing, we are dying every day for this slogan: equality, real equality, leading to the real democracy, which is betrayed by the international community when they ally with dictatorship in our region. And as a result, they are now suffering from movements in their countries that glorize the racism, violence, etc., etc.
Thank you, and I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to go straight across to Her Highness Sheikha Intisar AlSabah.
Thank you so much, Simon. I would like to read a little bit as my closing remark. I wrote an article, and I'd like to read a couple of sentences from it. And it's: empowering women economically does not merely start with providing them with financial support. It starts with removing the psychological barriers that are deeply embedded in them, which is what you spoke about, Lord Simon. Removing the psychological barriers allows every single person to be able to set goals, to work for the betterment of their lives and the betterment of their communities. And I would like to end it with quoting one of our most amazing women who lives in Shatila camp. She's Syrian, lives in Shatila camp in Lebanon. And I would just like to say a couple of, quote a couple of things she said. Before the sessions, I was closed off and resistant. I had pain and darkness within me. I was hostile and narcissistic with others. The sessions helped me to remove this negativity from within. The sessions also helped me with my children, who are the only thing that I love and that I still have following the war. I was not emotionally available to my older children, not even aware enough to notice them growing up around me. But I have changed with my youngest child, and I want to be more peaceful and giving to her. I also want to make up for not being there for my older children. The great news is after 9 years of being in a refugee and having literally zero, with the amazing support of drama therapy, and we are blessed to have Fatma as one of our amazing success stories. She turned her life around and now she is running a business with 35 other women, and a successful business too. So again, I will end this by saying we can give a lot of humanitarian aid, as much as we think is possible, but without combining it with psychological aid. And I don't like using the word aid, with psychological self-empowerment. There's no sustainability in what we're doing. The cycle will continue and continue and continue. And every time I'm asked to speak at any conference or anywhere, I always end it with, I call for every humanitarian aid agency to include psychological support as the biggest proponent in any intervention they do after a crisis or war. Because without the psychological aspect, we are creating victims. We are continuing their thoughts of being victimized, and therefore, because they feel victimized, they will victimize others. So if we want peace within ourselves because we see people thriving, if we want peace within our world because we want to stop wars, whatever one wants to call it, clashes, whatever one wants to call it, even abuse within families, we have to always start with psychological support, and not any normal psychological support. Let's not go to the dim and victim increasing psychological support where we can sit all day and speak about, oh my God, this one's hurt me. No, that's not the kind of psychological support we advocate for. We're talking about group psychological support where they realize they are all connected and they all have the same problems, and then they have immediate mentorship of how others have changed their lives. So always humanitarian aid has to include psychological support.
Thank you, and thank you for such a strong call to action as well on something that's incredibly tangible and incredibly important. I'm going to zip very quickly across to Lord Simon Woolley, as we're just about out of time for your thoughts, and then over to Dr. Salma Nims as well.
I'll keep it very brief. First, let me say that I'm honoured to be with such courageous women who have had their lives endangered, and yet they stand tall with a message of solidarity and unity. I think that finding allies in the global struggle is really our best tool that we have, that we talk to each other, that we show support and show solidarity. I think that, as they say, that the arc of history bends towards justice, and I think we're on the right side of justice, Simon. But what I would hope that you would do, along with my sisters, is help sow a golden thread with such good people, so we are connected, we're united in this voice that will speak truth to power, that will give the psychological support from the mental slavery that the oppressors seek to give to us. And I, like my sisters, wake up every single morning, with the utter belief that I can change my world, that we can change our world. And I feel strengthened by that. And thank you for giving me this platform, Simon, and to my sisters.
Thank you, and absolutely, that golden thread is really important to the World Humanitarian Forum, and we're very keen to continue these conversations and to support the discussion on the redefining of equality and the rebuilding as we come out of the pandemic. Dr. Salma, your final words, please.
Well, I would like to remind us all of SDG 10, which is supposed to aim for reducing inequalities within and among nations. In order to be able to do that, governments, people need to revisit structures for decision making, starting from the UN Security Council, which people, some nations are voting very important human rights related decisions, ending wars and occupations, and making some regimes and responsible in front of the whole world for their crimes, down to local communities being representative of all the members of those communities, regardless of their race, gender, origins, all of those across these issues, because these structures impact how things are being implemented. I would like to also focus on leveraging grassroots and non-governmental organization networks and human rights activists to expose those realities, inequalities, and to unite for all of us, unite across our diversity. In the end, we have different focuses, we have different areas of work, but we all share this commitment to human rights and justice. So we need to unite over these universal values and work together, and also face hate speech that we are being faced with because of what we are standing for, because the lives of some activists are being endangered because of what they're standing for.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salma. And I'm very conscious of time and that we have run over slightly. I've been trying to capture as many notes as I can from what has been a really insightful session. The discussion for me has really brought to life the inequalities faced by many throughout the world. And from each of you on this panel, it's been a real call to action for humanitarianism to do more and to go further to reduce inequalities, but also to think beyond our current understanding of inequalities. I guess to use equity and justice in new and different ways to create equal citizenships. And going back to one of the points, while we talk about how we can build back better, we must recognize that what we had before wasn't great. And what we need to do is rebuild, to scrap the low baseline we had before, to think bigger and to think bolder, to build new better, and to establish equality, inclusion, equity, and justice in everything we do and you all do as a humanitarian community in the audience. We really must take full advantage, I think, of the global reset to remove the psychological barriers, to do more and to do it faster. So with that, I'm going to close this session with a huge thanks to Lord Simon Woolley, Dr. Salma Nims, Her Highness Sheikha AlSabah, and to Mrs. Tawakkol, Karman. Thank you, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining the World Humanitarian Forum today. Thank you all and have a very good day.